I'm happy to welcome you here for this webinar for about 1 hour that we're going to have together. This is actually the second in a series that is organized by Integ Partner. We want to continue the series, and we have decided that we want to give some kind of webinars where we don't teach something or put ourselves in the foreground, but we put customers in the foreground and let them talk from the fields and tell what experience they've made, not just about working with us, but also on that occasion, what kind of particular experience they have had with dealing with situations, with challenges, and creating success in their companies. Okay, Eurion, so thanks a lot. And maybe for a start, it would be good if you tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What are the kind of the cornerstones of your career? Why are you here?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Eurion Kemish. 37 years old. I have a dual nationality. My father is British and my mother is Dutch. But born and raised in the Netherlands, so probably a little bit more Dutch than British. Background in university and college was in basically, I would say, like management sciences, so very wide perspective, nothing too detailed, but covering a broad area of subjects. And I started my career with Seco slightly more than 13 years ago in the Netherlands, in one of the subdivisions called Jabro Tools as a market analyst. Pretty quickly within that, because I'm quite a structured person and very analytical, got the responsibility to also work with pricing of products. But actually with this analytical perspective came very much a request from group. Can you do the things you do for our subdivision and do it for the whole group? So I started working for our head office, still based in the Netherlands, but basically analyzing competitors, visiting trade fairs across the world. Did that in total probably for 6-7 years, with that transition in the middle. During that time, started doing I guess it's an equivalent of an MBA in marketing strategy, because that really had my attention. And I think that's a moment that for me, a light bulb went on for really how do you take strategy and different models within strategy and sort of apply them in practice. Because strategy is great, but if you can't apply it and work with it, it doesn't get you very far. Then I realized I didn't want to be in business intelligence because it's quite far away. It's very much macroeconomics. I wanted to get my hands a bit more dirty. Got the opportunity to move to Asia. Very exciting times where I moved to Pune in India. Took on a role as business development manager for the Asia Pacific region for us. And then that's actually also the moment I really came into touch with Integ Partner and the integral management, inclusive leadership, the whole philosophy around that. Because I became responsible basically we call it Life 2 in Seco Tools in our company, to roll out that as a program, sort of the education of the organization and get that movement going. Then, so that was around 2015, 2018. Pretty quickly after that, our sales unit manager in India left, and I got the opportunity to take over the sales unit. First time for me to take on reports. Before I was more in a contributing role, but now really line responsible, deliver results. And then that was it was a fantastic period, and we're going to talk more about that, right? So then after that, actually got the opportunity to move back to Europe in the position where I am now, where I'm the VP for sales for North Europe. In Seco Tools, we have worked with 5 sales regions, and we've divided Europe in, well, it's West Europe and South America, it's South Europe, and it's North Europe. And I'm responsible for the North Europe sales cluster in that. Okay. So that's a brief nutshell, because time is tight with my background.
Now you've mentioned your employer Seco Tools already several times, and since we're going to talk about a time some years ago in Seco Tools, maybe it will be helpful for everybody to understand what kind of company is Seco Tools. What is that?
Yeah, Seco Tools is in the manufacturing industry, basically producing tools for metal machining. So it's 100% B2B. Basically, anybody who produces or machines any metal, and also including composites, could be a potential customer for us. So the industries we serve are really broad, going from aerospace, power generation, medical, like dental implants or knee implants, but also defense industry, food processing, agriculture. It's a really wide spectrum there. Seco Tools, global company, Swedish in origin, headquartered in Fagersta. Basically, sort of cutting tools to not the machines, but the tools used to actually machine the metal is the core business. And in recent years now, looking to really move into adjacent areas around the machine. We're about slightly over 4,000 people worldwide. Give or take 700 million euros revenue. A little bit of dent there with Corona, of course, like I think so many industries present basically globally. Of course, like Africa, not so much, South America to a lesser degree, because there's less manufacturing industry there, but present in at least 40 countries with rep office or our own direct office.
Okay, so in this conversation, we want to focus about on the time and the context of the position that you've had before your present position. Can you tell us a bit more about that context? Where was that, and what situation did you find there?
Yeah, so the timeline we're going to talk about is a couple of years ago in the Indian sales unit, and the experiences there, working with integral management and inclusive leadership. And when I got the opportunity to take over there from the previous sales unit manager and started looking around in there, I think some of the things we saw is very much command and control leadership style, top down, which fits a bit with the sort of traditional Indian management style. So very hierarchical, boss knows everything, boss decides everything, limited opportunity for feedback. So, you know, finding that a very demotivated team, feeling they'd not get any chance to develop themselves over the course of, they were mentioning like 5-6 years. So some deep-rooted issues there. That in turn then led also to saw a big focus on what's in it for me across the organization, feeling, you know, this helplessness, right? I'm not being heard. I see things are not working. I have suggestions. There's no attention to it. And that, of course, translated on the business side of things as well, not just the culture and the people in the organization, but really been a loss-making unit for many years, losing market share for the recent years at that point in time as well. So really a challenging situation on both sides, basically.
But when you started, you already mentioned it, you started with that program Live 2, and it wasn't just because the situation was particularly like that in India that the company decided on Live 2, but it was a bit of another situation. Could you tell a bit more about that constellation and what that program was meant to be?
Seco Tools we've been really working on our purpose and our vision and where do we want to be as a company moving forward. And that journey started, must be by now 8-9 years ago, actually in the head office in Fagersta. At that point, spearheaded by our CEO, Lars Bergstrom. So he was a firm believer in, you know, I want us to become better at, I want us to become more successful as a company, but success not just in delivering the numbers, but also in driving really this great place to work, and how to engage the organization to tackle these super difficult problems, right? The wicked problems which you can't just put your finger on. So that started and was already actually, I guess, 2.5-3 years in the rollout in Fagersta. which is by far we have the most people in that unit. So it was a big program, took a long time. And India was actually, is for us also a production location. So it's also 500 people there. It's not just the sales unit. And that was the second unit, or the first outside of the headquarters, where we said, okay, let's implement that there, the learnings from it, because we were seeing fantastic results in Fagersta, actually. We saw the difficulties of the journey as well, but also the changes it was starting to bring. And then the manager responsible for the sales region, at that time, he's very progressive in his thinking, and he's very open to try stuff. So he said, okay, I want to be the second place where we do this. So bring it to me.
Okay. I think it's interesting when you say this thing that, your CEO didn't just want to create an economic success, but also in terms of being a great place to work. And as we will see later on, that doesn't mean that there are like two objectives that have nothing to do with each other. But the great place of work is also an important condition to create a better success economically. I think it's important to mention that right now, because that's what we need to keep in the back of our minds when we look at why are people going about a change project? Why are you doing that? So you came to this position, and it was quite soon connected to this task of rolling out this live to the first time outside of headquarters. So can you tell a bit more? What does that mean? What was meant by that program?
Yeah, so it's multiple sides to it, of course. But a good way probably to split it up is to talk on the one hand about the people and the culture, to talk about processes, and to talk about systems and tools. And I think what we saw with the integral management was it actually helped us on all the sides, because I think very often change management programs, they fail. Maybe they're initially successful, but they also struggle to sustain things. And it's because they're not taking the holistic picture into account. So it's important to work on multiple facets at the same time. And it's not about moving mountains, right? It's about a lot of small steps. But for us, the integral management, and where, I immediately also, because it's very close to my heart now, where it really hit a nerve in a positive sense, was it gives you a number of tools which help people communicate, which help people collaborate, because in the end, so much is about communication and collaboration. A lot of it boils down to that. It gives you the tools. It also gives you a process, a sort of structure which you can follow, this drumbeats. It helps guide communication, thereby eliminating some of the traditional pitfalls. And in effect, there, coming into the people side, actually by working on those two sides with the tools and the processes, and putting extra emphasis on the people, you can actually start to change the culture, which is, the typical saying, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast. But in reality, that makes it always sound like culture can't change, which is not true. It's a very long process. You need to nourish it over a long time. So you need to, have a long breath to do it. But you can definitely move certain things there. And I think that for us was what made it so good, is because it tackled all the areas. It was not, okay, we're going to do a two-day workshop and expect next week everything's going to be different. It's, the program itself was a 2-year program, every 6 months, intensive training sessions with all the team leaders, not only the managers, but also if it's like a team leader in production, all involved in that, getting certain tools to communicate better, getting that structure to work within, setting up that drum beats, also setting up support for them, because it's a new way of working. Change, of course, is difficult.
I'm curious about that aspect when you say about changing culture. To what extent were you explicit about that objective? Or, there's one way of saying, hey, we want to change the culture and therefore we're doing all these things. Or there's another way of saying, hey, we want better collaboration. As a consequence, we want to connect strategy implementation with a continuous, as you said, this drumbeat, with a continuous improvement on the ground. And as a side effect, lo and behold, the culture changes. Yeah. What was your approach? What was your take on that?
I think in reality, it never works if you say we want to change the culture, right? Because it doesn't speak to people. You always need to end up in tangible behaviors, because in the end, culture is mindset and behaviors. It's sort of who we are. And so the way to go about that was not to say, okay, we're going to change the culture. At a later stage, we did become more explicit at it, but we didn't start at that point, because that doesn't really work if that's your starting point. But we started with, okay, right, these are some of the pain points we see. We want to address them and figure out how we can do better. So it's if you talk about how to convince people and how to get them on board and engage them, it's not by telling them, it's also a little bit like, yeah, you've been doing it wrong all this time. That's not the case, right? You've been doing a good job. You are where you are right now, but there's always that question for, okay, can we take the next step? So it's about framing the message in such a way that the people see it as a next step, and not feel it like, no, you've been wrong. This is right. Shift, because that creates the resistance. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. It sounds really simple to say it like that. It's super difficult, but.
Yeah, but I think it's important to kind of also choose what perspective are you addressing the topic from. So I'm curious. So now you had people, you had this structure of some meetings, of these big trainings, big meetings, everybody together, and then the drum beat. How did people react to that when you just said, we are now rolling out this thing, and that's what we're going to do?
It was I wasn't there for the first meetings in India, because I came on board in the second training. But what I understood from the first the coworker seminar, the big meeting where you bring everybody together, actually the first training with all the leaders, there were a couple of people, higher ranked people, who stood up and basically said, this is nonsense. Andreas, the manager of Asia, you go back to the CEO Lars and tell him that this makes no sense. We don't need this. So a lot of skepticism. But I think, in the training, very quickly you sense it's a different way of having power as a manager, right? It's not having the power to tell people what to do. It's learning to have power by working through people and with people. And it's a very, if you've been 20 years doing it one way, and now all of a sudden they're going to say, oh, it's not about who reports to you, it's how you work together. Ooh, you can't tell people what to do, right? It hits a wrong spot for some people. So different responses. A lot of the, I guess, team leaders lower in the organization were like, this is a chance. So, you got a mixture. Some people resisting, some people jumping on board, saying, finally, we get a chance to get our voice heard. And of course, there's always also a group sort of in the middle, like, okay, arms across each other. Let's wait and see what happens here. A bit of power play going on.
That's also pertaining to frontline employees, because now you were talking about managers, but what about the employees?
I think you get sort of the same picture. In India, in our units, very strong union. And of course, they are the more vocal ones, stepping and standing up and speaking. But they, I think, were general positive, because what they see, of course, is an opening, right? They see an opening to get their points heard and taken into account. So in general, the organization, they were skeptical at first, I think, because like so many change programs, I guess everybody on this call also, you've been through so many change programs, and it's like, that's the flavor of the year, right? It's one program. Okay, I don't like this one. Let's wait it through. Next year, it'll be the next one. So you always will have this skepticism, I think. But still plenty of people like, okay, there is a chance here. Let's stand up, let's speak up.
So you came into the second round, imagine also the second coworker seminar where everybody came together. And when you look now at the whole period that you've been there and run this program with them, what change did you observe in this poster, in this reaction, in comparison to what you saw at the beginning? How did that evolve?
Yeah, it's there were some clashes, and quite a few of the people who stood up and said, power for me means commanding people are no longer with us. I think that's also an inevitable consequence of going through these kind of radical changes. But if I look sort of at the transition as a whole, I think it's created a much more open atmosphere to bring forward ideas, to communicate in a better way as well, and especially to try, still don't always succeed, but try to understand each other's perspectives in a better way. So to really not just say, okay, and it's the typical finger pointing between sales and operations, for instance. Hey, operations, you're not delivering, and operations to sales, well, you didn't tell us it was going to be in order, and all sorts of finger pointing and excuses, instead of saying, okay, we have this challenge, let's sit together, let's work through it, find a solution, because that's what matters in the end. And as long as we learn and move forward, that's what's key. So it shifted towards that. We still have a long way to go, don't get me wrong. These kind of change journeys are multi-year, maybe even multi-decade, I don't know, but there's always the next step, right? So
yeah, of course.
I think some significant steps.
Can you give some more examples of how you observed, what did you observe where you could say, now I'm seeing a change, now I'm seeing something that I haven't seen before?
I mean, there's a lot of small things. If I focus a bit more on the team in the sales units, and what changes we saw there, I mean, there were so many things we were working on. It's like performance management reviews, or performance dialogues. It's the, hey, what's in it for me perspective. When I first did that with, at that point, my new reports, we work with a 5-level scale, far below expectations, below meets, exceeds, far exceeds. And they put themselves everywhere on exceeds and far exceeds. Then I started saying, because they filled it in first, I got it. Then I planned a meeting with them, and I planned 2-hour session. And they were like, 2-hour session? I was one of the lucky ones before. I got 15 minutes with the manager. And you notice, like, to talk about themselves, their development plans, their ambitions. Initially they saw it like a salary negotiation. Okay, what's my increment going to be? Okay, I'm going to be far exceeds, and then I hope I end close to that somewhere. And that over time, I mean, the first 6 months, not much happened there, but in the course of let's say month 6 until I left there, that really started transitioning into people.
Sorry, for people to understand, for about how many years were you there?
I was there for 2 years in the sales unit, and 1.5 years before implementing the program across Asia. So running the training and that kind of thing.
So it's another 1.5 years going from.
Yeah, 3.5 years in total in Asia, but the last 2 with the sales unit. And that's also the moment where I was more deeply involved in actually implementing it as the manager myself. The first 1.5 years, I was training other managers how to utilize the tools, so to say. But I mean, that transition from okay, I don't know what to say here. Do I even dare to say where I want to develop, into, okay, well, I think, these are the areas I need to develop. I would like to go on this training program. Can we make some budget for that? Really opening up and getting really, fantastic, like, coaching dialogues with them, where before you had to, like, pull everything out of them. So that's another example. Also would be is where you saw in the communication towards the production, where they started opening up more, trying to understand the perspectives, trying not to find the solution is, okay, I need it yesterday. Okay, but what could we do? Okay, then I can go back to the customer and actually say, okay, well, we can't do tomorrow, we can do next week, or, well, we can do 100 pieces tomorrow and then the next 100 next week. Would that also be okay? Instead of just making things black and white, we started to see grayscales and possibilities within that.
So these are like effects on the behavior side. How did these effects pay out on the business side?
Yeah, so on business, as I mentioned in the beginning, loss-making units for probably most of its existence, losing market share in the year. So the first half year, I took over end of April. That first year, not much changed. We lost sales, profitability was a few points up, not much was happening. But the second year, when the puzzle pieces started to fall into place, we got close to double-digit growth in sales, and the profitability went into double-digit black numbers instead of red numbers. So a fantastic step up. But I mean, I guess it was over the course of that, from the beginning, it's moving a lot of small pieces into place. And then once they click, it starts really moving. And this just makes it a bit difficult to explain what did you do, because there's so many small steps involved here.
Patience, it sounds to me, right? Not
Sorry?
to expect results too soon. It's a question of patience.
As well, yes. I mean, not to forget, we're talking about changing culture and changing people. And that's, you can't write an email on Friday saying, okay, Monday you're gonna behave differently and expect that works. It takes time. People need to understand why at first. There needs to be an element, what's in it for me, right? Because I want to get something out of it as well. If it's negative for me, why should I do it? And then it's a question of keeping at it. So rinse and repeat the certain messages and just keep going and keep going. So it takes time. Yeah.
Now we were talking a lot about the organization and what happened there to the people. What did you change? What did you learn out of all this experience? What impact did it have on you?
I mean, people sometimes ask me, if you could go back in time with what you know now, would you move to India? Because I think India as a country has a very negative vibe around it. Typically, people have their opinions on it, but I would not change a thing in the world, because it's been such an eye-opening experience to be in a culture that is so different compared to your own, and realizing it's a little bit like Alien in New York. I'm one foreigner. I'm not going to change really with my culture, the whole culture there. No, I need to adapt. And then I can try and pull them in certain areas a little bit towards what I think is, which fits with my values, but also acknowledging that, we're not going to change the world in that way, but it's small steps. And I think, definitely the appreciation, I guess, the appreciation for different cultures was sort of ignited a spark there, which got me really curious in people development and cultural perspectives in that. So I think what I've taken with me and what I use in my role now is still it's the same tools. It's different cultures. If you talk North Europe, so the Nordics, Germany, some Eastern European countries, but in the end it's all still people. So I've really this drive to focus and think about the people and how to engage them, because in the end, if you win both their hearts and their minds, so if they can understand and follow it, and if they can also, if they buy into it, then you really can engage them, and then sort of the sky becomes the limit. You can really move mountains then.
Mm-hmm. That sounds interesting. Now, you said you were there for 2 years when you started the sales management position and so on. And that's already some years ago. So of course I'm wondering, how much did this effort depend on you? How sustainable was it? Did you already think about that when you were there?
Yeah, I think any change management perspective typically starts with a strong person driving it. So we did lose some speed there, which is, that's to be expected, I think. But even in my time in the sales unit, when I took it over, it comes to expectations, right? Okay, there's a foreign European manager is coming to run the sales units, and their expectation is that I was going to spend 90% of the time out with them at customers closing deals. I didn't do that. I did maybe 10% of the time, and then even trying not to close deals, but I wanted them to do that. So my focus from the very beginning was very much on, okay, where can I contribute that they have a lasting effect? So the focus was very much on the processes, on the mindsets, on certain procedures and rules we had, and really starting the dialogue between themselves for, well, is this the right setup? Talking about, for instance, about discount levels and who can approve which discount levels. So when we started, a sales guy could not approve any discounts. A sales manager could approve 30, 35%, where the average for that certain product was 50% in the market. So what does that then mean? It means it all ends up back on my desk, right? Every day, 6 emails, please approve. And what do I need to do? I need to go back to them. Okay, give me the story around, give me some reference if you want me to take a decision. So it was like, I don't want to do this. This is not where I see my role. But at the same time, it's not so easy to say, okay, now as a salesman, you can give 70% discount because, okay, but how do I know if it's still good business or not? Do I even dare to take those decisions because I've never been allowed to before? What if I make a mistake? Right. So it's those changes, in each of those tiny changes in themselves take a lot of thinking for, okay, how do you tackle the process, the system, and the people side of it to make sure you move on all of them? Because you can give them the authority to give up to 100% discount. Still my dream, by the way. But at the same time, you need to give them the tools to be able to judge and the knowledge, is this good business or not? And how do I then compensate to ensure that we don't overall start losing money on that side? And then on the people side, to coach them in that but feel confident if you take a decision. And if you make a mistake, that happens for all people. I make mistakes, you make mistakes, as long as we learn from it and move forward. So kind of taking away this fear as well. So it's, and coming then to your question, it's a long answer, by the way, sorry for that. I think especially on I think on all 3D areas, a certain foundation has remained there. So it's not that all of a sudden the business results started dropping, but they kept sticking to the drum beats. They kept sticking to the ways of communication and the exercises to exchange feedback instead of going into defensive mode, to talk about, well, you do this well. Can you help me with this, instead of saying you do this poorly? So they stuck to those. We probably lost a bit of momentum because I was very pushy on taking the next step and the next step and the next step. But the foundation, I think, is still there. And I think that's what shows the power as well for this, for working through people, because it's all about, as a manager, it's not my role to have the house of cards collapse the moment I leave. The dream, of course, is that I leave and it keeps flourishing, right? And that's been should always actually be the focus from the start.
Could it be that because the focus of this initiative is to a large extent to create a condition so that people can develop their ownership?
Yeah.
Then if you are more or less successful in doing it, then you have already built the thing into the whole process that creates the condition for sustainability, because then when they have ownership, that's when they want to keep on having it and keep on and also have an idea of the means and how they have to behave in order to keep on having that.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a good point maybe to round up, because after that we want to open up for questions. So maybe if you look back on this period, and both on the effects it had on yourself, as you said, on the way you think about your job, and it had on the organization, what are kind of the key takeaways that you would like also to point out to the audience?
I would say start by being curious, because that's the essence to really always keep finding that next step and to figure out what's going on. So ask lots of questions and never stop asking them. I think that's a super important starting point. I think talking about processes and tools, need to at the same time be very careful if you want people to work with them, to not force stuff onto people, because what works for one person might not work for another, or for one department might not work for another. So it's also about meeting the people where they're at. So some might be more advanced, and you should then not start at step 1 with them, but start at step 2 with them, because they're at that level already. I think that's also very important, and things we learned going into the journey, and we made some mistakes as well, where we were too much forcing a certain methodology on people. It takes time. I guess has to be said, right? You need to have a long breath. Don't expect results the next day. Maybe for some people, but it's about reaching this tipping point, right? Keep at it long enough, get more and more people on board, work with the people who want to work with you. and who want to change. Don't spend all the time and energy trying to convince the ones who don't, because that's just lost time to start making small steps. And dream big, but start small. So have the vision and the dream and direction to take, to move mountains, but in reality, focus on taking the small steps. I like the analogy when you say, like, if you're walking somewhere, you need to have your eyes both on where you're going, so out into the horizon, right? Where am I heading towards? At the same time, you need to keep where am I putting my feet? Is there a pothole there or something which I'm going to fall over? So you need both in that as well. So that'd be, I guess, a bit some of the key elements to give.
Cool.
Maybe one last one, because we talked a bit before about that. The question, is this a story about a Westerner going to India? Just to emphasize that, it's not about, and I don't want to give that as a key takeaway, so I want to just emphasize that. It's about people, right? People and groups of people together who have a certain culture. And that is relevant whether you're in India or in the UK or in the Netherlands, where I come from. Now I'm living in Germany. It's literally a stone's throw away from my parents, where I grew up. But the culture is totally different again. I thought it would be much more similar, but devil is in the details. And again, it's all people. And there's some fantastic tools, and I think you guys will share out the link there to good thought-provoking thinker there. Look at that as a way to, it's a different perspective, is all it is. There is no right or wrong in that, right? It's about finding each other and being open to their perspective, and then of course hoping that they are open to yours, and then together it should become more. So
I think this is a lesson that you can also take out of this cross-country experience and use it in organization. Let's say another company, another culture, even another department. You go to, I don't know, production, and you go to sales, and you find different cultures. And there, I think the same rules, what you say about curiosity, what you say about understanding what is the next step that they can actually go, and what's the right level of pushiness, as you described it, they all apply.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot for that conversation. I think it's a good time to open up and see, who has some questions. Oscar, our producer, you're going to enable people to unmute themselves. So I think, somebody has just written something in the chat. Let me just check that. Or Marie-Noël, you can unmute yourself and actually say it. Yeah, and then we can take it here as a conversation. I think if technically it's possible.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was triggered by the wording drum beat. Mm-hmm. And I really like that word, but I'm not sure what you really mean by that. Is it a recurrent events in the program? What is it exactly? Because it's a word that is, I think, for many people, something positive.
Yeah. Maybe it's more rhythm of the beat, right? It is about this keep on going, having a certain, and that's what I meant with having a long breath. You're not going to change it with a workshop every 6 months. You need to do stuff in between as well.
Yeah.
Think about how we change habits. I want to stop smoking. It's a lot of little steps, and finding the right timing, if you will, right? If you music, finding the right timing there, not too long in between, so people tend to forget and slip, not too close together, so there's no room for change and trying stuff. Typically like 2-3 weeks, and then that's the drum beats. Yeah.
Maybe you can describe a little bit because I imagine, as other places in Seco where I have witnessed it, some things happened in 6-month intervals and something happened in intervals of about 2 weeks or more or less. What were they, just in a few words, so that people get an understanding?
So I mean, one big part of the integral management is the connection and explanation from management to everybody in the organization. We call it vertical integration. Because we want everybody in the organization to understand where are we heading, what is our strategy. And that's every 6 months, there is a session there where you bring the whole organization together. And basically, from a management point of view, explain the strategy to them. Let them come back with feedback. We agree, we don't agree, targets too high, targets too low, targets okay. Anchor that in together with them and then ask them for, okay, we need your help with these specific areas. So that's a 6-month cycle. Then if you look more, then the teams will have selected what will they work on, what are they going to contribute. And there then you go into a bi-weekly cycle, or in some cases we had like 3-week cycle, still okay. But a month already, when we had it in some cases for a month, it turned out that you came into the meeting and it was like, yeah, what was that action point again? What was that about? And then you lose momentum so quickly. We had it where teams were meeting every week and I was like, yeah, but I didn't get time to do it yet. So it's the trick is to find sort of that 2 to 3 week spacing where you say, okay, that's often enough that we can keep, feeling on the pulse. Are we getting momentum? Are we closing actions? Yet not too far that you lose the momentum in it and the energy with that. It's all about managing the energy of the people.
Because it has to be emphasized that these kind of actions were, for most people, had the character of a little project that they were doing on top of the day job, right? They were not, it was not their day job, but it's how to improve their day job. And so they have to organize time slots where they can actually work on that.
Yeah, and it's especially valid the lower in the organization you go. A machine operator is not typically thinking strategy, right? He's looking at what products do I need to produce. At the same time, he probably has a lot of fantastic ideas about how to improve the process around him because he runs into a lot of irritations and issues every day. And that you should actually then lift up again and say, okay, well, how can we take that into a bit more longer term horizon and get them involved in that? I mean, their primary focus is, of course, still produce products, but we want them to spend some amount, 5 to 10% of their time, also thinking about how to improve the process so the next time things are better. And it's also that's an important element that you mentioned there.
I think, I don't know, some of you in the audience, I know have at least a foot, if not both, in the agile world, and you see the connection here. We're talking about manufacturing, we're talking about not about software development, but still the whole principle of inspect and adapt. How can we take a break at regular intervals? And the big break is in 6 months intervals, but there's also small breaks in these 2 or 3 weeks. How can we take a break to have a look and work on the system and say, okay, what do we need to change? And then we try it out. Does it really work? And then we can go do the work in the system again. So this I think it's interesting to see the connections of the philosophy, although the historical development of these methods is actually quite from different parts, from different industries as well.
But the 6 month period also, I mean, it's nothing is set in stone because now with Corona hitting us, we recently introduced then our new reasoning for 2020. And of course, March, April, you start to see, wait a minute, the world is sort of going to hell. So what we did is we actually made a new reasoning, a new communication of our strategy to our people and said, okay, priority 1, safety. Make sure you are safe, everybody. Priority 2, stay connected to your customers. Even if they're slow, stay connected, right? Keep that connection going. And step 3, okay, we're going to need to implement some things to safeguard our company and our company health so we all have a job, after however long this takes. So even though we say now 6 months, it doesn't need to be. So actually what's happened for us, it's the big picture, the Seco global strategy is actually once a year. But if need be, we can change it tomorrow, basically. By making a new reasoning, communicating that down into the organization and saying, okay, now these are the top priorities, right? This has changed in the world. And in the case of COVID, it's pretty emergency, right? So.
I think it's also like you were talking about, what are the development steps before concerning your project. And I think what you're just showing is also it's, a tool. If you have, like, I don't know, a complicated kitchen utensil or something, at the beginning you have an approach. It says here on the instruction, I need to press that button, and you just follow blindly in a certain process. And maybe you're not even capable of evaluating, well, does it make sense or does it not make sense? Once you have mastered that step, you can then start using it and tweaking it and adapting it to your situation. And we have exactly that situation where people start realizing this is not a bureaucratic exercise that we have to follow blindly, because also it doesn't blindly guarantee success, but it's a tool that is always there in order to achieve a goal for an end. And if that condition changes, then maybe I have to adapt the way I use the tool.
Yep.
So that's what you're saying.
Just for you to notice is that there is more questions in the chat. Maybe to continue a little bit with that.
Yeah, great.
That's good. Oh, Axel has a question. Axel, why don't you unmute your microphone and just ask your question away?
Yeah, good afternoon to everybody. Well, thank you for your presentation, and I think it's quite interesting. I've done that kind of change management or cultural change in another country, in Austria, which might be slightly different from India, but coming from Germany, it's definitely a different culture. So my question to you is, what do you think about the impact of the top management's behavior? And top management means not your level of management, but the management above you. What is their impact in that change process? And the second part is, how important is, in your opinion, in that whole process, the respect and the trust to the people that you have to deal with?
Okay, so the first question, I'm just going to pull up the chat here so I can, what do you think the impact of top management? Yeah, I mean, it's super important, right? It has an impact. It depends a bit what level of the organization you go into, because it's different. It's a different language, a bit of a different world. If you look into a machine operator compared to a sales guy compared to middle management, but for sure it has impact. And then behavior and actions, yes, but I think there's also, you know, I'm now in the management of Seco, and then we're part of the Sandvik group, so we have one division in that company. But I think it's part of our role, being the management of Seco, is to be sort of that translation of what is communicated to shareholders of Sandvik into what does that mean for us and how we work with that. Because of course, communication to shareholders is very owner oriented. And that's only one of the stakeholders if you talk about a company, right? It's owners, it's the people, it's the customers, it's society. So I think that's a big role for any management in a company. And it's all about lead by example. I firmly believe in that. If you ask people to do things and change behavior and you show something different yourself, that doesn't fly, right? And if you look like a dog but quack like a duck, are people going to trust you? Not really. And the second part of your question, if I recall correctly, the respect and the trust to people compared to management, I think it's with the dog and the duck, right? I think it's super important nobody will trust you and believe you if you say you're going to do something or if something's going to happen and in the end it doesn't happen. I mean, of course that can happen, right? Business changes, but I think it's key then, the essential part is in the explaining to the organization what is happening, why is it happening, and I think that's how you build trust. And also by not just saying always this is the way, but taking the input of the organization is another way to build trust. So to really show, in the sense of doing it, that you're open to their input. Doesn't mean necessarily that it becomes a democracy in the organization. Don't get me wrong, right? Management is still, in the end, responsible for certain things. But I think it's about finding that balance in for one, communication, really, but sort of showing that you're part of the team. It's a bit Dutch culture in that sense, right? I don't see myself as the manager in the organization. I roll up my sleeves, I go out there and help them. And I think that's a bit that's also how you build trust for me as a person.
On another level, there is a question from Bernhard here. And Bernhard, why don't you unmute and ask your question?
Absolutely, it's on a similar topic here, and many times I have seen that we tend to forget about middle management. We talk about the direct team leaders, we work maybe in the management team, and then there is some layers in between that is supposed to do things, but we don't give them the means for it. How did you get the buy-in and ownership needed by your management team and the middle management that is needed to make this rock?
It's a lot of coaching and mentoring which comes into play there, and you're absolutely right. It's a lesson we learned in Fagersta during our first sort of rollout of the program. Is we're asking all team leaders, so middle management, team leaders down in operation, to go, have group meetings, be open, make sure that everybody speaks up, be open to criticism, and then all of a sudden you realize, like, wait a minute. They've never done this before. They're not experienced. They're scared to stand. We have people who said, yeah, I'll wait until the next session in 6 months' time to stand on the podium. Because you can't blame them because they've never been exposed to it. We've never developed them in it. So I think a lot of it really is also about people development. And it's starting for us now to change. Also, if we recruit now for certain leadership positions, it really has changed the profile that we look for in people. So it's no longer like the best sales guy is going to be the sales manager. If his core competency and all his strengths are in sales, but it's going to be, no, wait a minute. I want you to focus on developing the sales process, setting up a sales strategy, because we need to be successful, not just, next quarter, but for the next years, and focus heavily on people development. So it's my firm belief that people development, so coaching, mentoring, sending people on programs, it costs a hell of a lot of money, right? Which also always makes it contentious, but it's essential to ignite change. But again, all about leading by example. It starts with the top. If the top management doesn't believe, it's going to be really, really hard.
We got 2 more questions that I would like to fit in, at least until we have to close at the end of the hour. So Dean, what is your question?
Thank you. Really intriguing talk. Thank you. My question is that I wonder if it's relevant to identify people with a growth mindset who are entrepreneurial and can deal with high ambiguity and support them on a path which is different to those who are more operational, perhaps more traditional, and take them on a path to those which are separate to those more entrepreneurial, adventurous type people.
Yeah, I think it's I think the key traits for that first group you're talking about is curiosity, right? Because if you're curious by nature, you're going to always ask the question, okay, but how does that work? What's the next step there? How do we keep going? And when you will always end up with those 3 groups. One group who doesn't believe in it, the group who's on the fence, and the group who believes in it and wants to move. So finding the people with that curiosity and that drive to continuously develop in that group of people who want to move is essential to, like you say, really get things moving on a more tactical, strategic level. You still need both, right? I mean, we need to keep producing, we need to keep selling. So the operational perspective is not less relevant. I think it's typically, at least what I've seen in Seco and also in many customers I visited, is somewhat the strategic side is somewhat perhaps undervalued there, the tactical strategic side of things. But it's absolutely essential also to find your champions, because you want to be able to show examples to the organization for, hey, look, we've taken a small step, we've got success. And then it's not me who has made the success. It's all about, take the blame, pass the praise. It's this group of people making the success. So really good point.
Thank you. I'd like to round this off with Peter's question. Peter, can you ask a question?
Yes. I was thinking of, is it fair to summarize your work to have brought down strategy to the shop floor? In other words, did you implement the strategic narrative in a true sense? And maybe it's not fair to say summarize your work, but maybe it's a key element of how you did in the end the change, because there's a lot of cultural change involved, but also that you can create North Stars for different levels of employees in the organization. Maybe you can a little bit elaborate on this aspect.
I guess for me, it doesn't really capture the full extent. I think absolutely if you talk about more the process side of things, because that vertical integration, it's all about making strategy, you know, this long-term vision. You need to translate that into daily changes, daily behavior, and that needs to align. So I think on that side, absolutely. It's been about taking that vision, taking that, starting to translate it in, well, what is the behavior we want to have people do in their day to day? Because that's when things really start changing. But I think the cultural perspective is equally important, because that's where you generate the sustainability from. And that's where you can also generate the speed from, the energy level of the people, you know, becoming like a self-learning organization. So I think it's important to not just look at the side of it's the strategy is now on the shop floor, but it's also about communication and collaboration and people opening up and flourishing in that and being able to do that for themselves, so that we're not fully there yet, and I think that will still take many years to come, but that actually also we really get this strategy going both ways. It's not just strategy taking from the top and making it operational, it's the operational becoming the strategy as well, so you get the full cycle. And there you need the cultural perspective in that to really create that.
Do you think if you would leave now, it would be sustained, or it would fall still apart?
Well, I'm not in India anymore, and it's still keeping going. So it's still ongoing for more than 2 years. Of course, I'm ignoring Corona, but that's affected everybody. But the changes, and of course, I still have my connections there, and talking to them. I mean, the changes are still going. I had some struggles, but they picked it up again, looking at, you know, what was the process, what was the drum beats, let's start that up again. Again, it does depend on strong leadership. So the top needs to really buy it and understand it and want to work with it, which is not for everybody, because cultural changes is a different topic than strategy. It's the soft side. It's typically more difficult than the hard side, but it is sustainable then, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Eurion. We have reached the top of the hour, so I thank everybody for participating. This is recorded, so it will be put on the website of Integ Partner if you want to point that out to any colleagues. And if you have any more questions or want to reach out to us for any reason, you have the contact of the person who has invited you here, so you have the link there. And we are also going to send, as Eurion has said, a link to some sources about this culture, way of thinking about culture that Eurion has pointed out. So you will get an email from us or a message from us. And yeah, thank you for participating. Thank you, Eurion, for your time and for your sharing.
Bye.
And I'm looking forward to having other webinars of this kind in the future. Bye, everybody.
Yep. Bye. Thanks for listening in.